All right. So like she said, my name's Esther. Um, Currently, I am a family preservation supervisor. And I have kind of a split position, so I do that. And then I also supervise our Pratt clinic. So I'm the clinical coordinator out in Pratt as well. I am a licensed specialist clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addictions counselor and a certified certified um, Kansas certified gambling counselor. Sorry, I think about that for a second. Um, and so I am here today to do a presentation, suicide prevention, know the signs to save lives. And as you'll learn as we go on, SAVE is an acronym that I use to kind of help you remember and learn and be able to process some of those things on suicide prevention. So a little bit of stuff before we start. Usually I do these trainings in person, and I'm very engaging in person, which seems like a weird thing for such a serious topic. But if you can keep on your camera as much as possible, I know that participation is a little bit harder virtually, but it's so much appreciated. And then also suicide can be kind of an intense topic for folks. If you need to take a break, please do so. If need be, after the training, I'm available to talk if you need to. Or as always, there's a National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and it's always down here at the bottom of every slide. It's a number that I cannot share enough, so I make sure that everybody always has that. A little bit about me. So I know I look young, but I've been in this field for 9.5 years. I have a lot of experience with mental health and with substance abuse. And for suicide prevention, it has been kind of my passion for about the last 5 years. This slide here is my youngest brother, Vincent. Actually last week we celebrated his 5-year anniversary of passing we lost him to suicide. And so after he died, our family was very committed to saying, how can we speak about mental health? How can we educate people on the signs of suicide prevention so that another family member doesn't have to go through what we're going through right now? And so suicide prevention is very much a passion of mine. And I hope that comes through in some of this training. And so these are just pictures that I like to share of him to show that he was a very silly, funny, goofy guy. He had passion for bullfighting, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, he also suffered from depression for a long time and ultimately lost his life to it. And so that kind of started my path into suicide prevention. So part of this training, it's kind of broken down this way. We'll talk about the objectives. You're going to learn about suicide in the United States. We're going to talk about some facts and some myths about suicide. Then we're going to go into what I call SAVE. We'll do some role plays, which sounds kind of scary, but it's not, because we'll do them together. And then we'll go into some questions, and then at the end, some resources and references for you. Hopefully by the end of today, or by the end of this training, you'll have a general understanding of the scope of suicide within the United States. You'll know how to identify someone who may be at risk for suicide. And then not only that, but you'll be able to know what to do once you've identified someone who may be at risk for suicide. So suicide in the United States, it's estimated that there's 42,000 deaths from suicide among the general population. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It's estimated that every 2.3 minutes, somebody dies by suicide. It's estimated that there's close to 1 million attempts a year. So that means every 35 seconds, someone attempts to end their own life. Those that have PTSD, which is oftentimes a lot of the folks that we tend to work with, right? They have almost a 15-time more likely to attempt suicide than those without PTSD. For women tend to attempt suicide 3 times more often than men do, but men die by suicide 4 times more often than women. And so the reason that is that men tend to choose more of the lethal methods, whereas women choose some of the least lethal methods. And so they have a higher chance of surviving their attempts. So even though they attempt more, the men die by suicide more. So true or false, you guys? Asking someone about suicide may lead them to taking his or her life. What do you think?
False.
Why do you think false?
Because I think it's good to talk about it.
Right, absolutely. So talking about suicide, asking them about suicide does not change their suicidal thoughts. Okay? But by us asking if they're having these thoughts, we're giving them permission to talk about them. We're giving them a safe spot to say, yes, I am really struggling right now. I do need help. Okay. We're not creating those thoughts in that person. We're just giving them a place to talk about them. And then I know that, I thought there was some stuff in the chat, but
People
okay.
said false. Yeah.
False. Okay, I was like, wait. So false. So true or false? If somebody really wants to die by suicide, there's nothing you can do about it.
We have a false pop up in the chat. Another false.
False. It's false, right? And you're like, well, how do we know that? Okay, so by making one form of suicide less convenient, it does not usually lead doesn't usually lead folks to find another method. Some folks will go find another method, but the majority will not. And so you're like, well, how do we know that? So in the UK, okay, when they had coal gas, it let off a lot of carbon monoxide in their ovens. Okay, and so they had a period where these carbon monoxide suicides were happening. There was so many folks who would turn on the oven and the carbon monoxide would end their life. Okay, when they switched from coal gas to oil and natural gases, the carbon monoxide that it let out went down. Okay, so the suicides by carbon monoxide poisoning went down as well. And so most folks would say, okay, well, if people weren't dying that way, they must have found another way. Well, they did it. What they noticed was that even though the suicides by carbon monoxide poisoning went down, no other suicide method went up. None whatsoever. And so that tells us, again, that if we can take away that means, we can potentially save someone's life. Okay, so the Golden Gate Bridge. What do you guys know about it in terms of what I'm talking about right now? What do you know about the Golden Gate Bridge? And what do you know about Golden Gate Bridge and suicide?
There's been a lot of people trying to commit suicide by jumping.
Right. There's a lot of folks that go there to end their life, right? And so for a long time, the idea was if I stop somebody from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, they're just going to go find another bridge to jump off of, right? And so for a long time, they didn't even have like fences and things up. And so as they've started to put up fences, and right now they're in works of getting more netting and stuff under there. But what they did in one study,
When you coming up here?
so they did one study, and there was about 500 people that were stopped from jumping off that Golden Gate Bridge, and they followed those people for 25 years. And 96% of them, after 25 years, were either still alive or died by some other method than suicide. So that tells us that only about 4 to 5% of those folks that were stopped from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge went on to end their life by suicide. That's a huge number of folks that were saved, right? And a huge number of folks that were able to, lead out their life without suicide. And so what that tells us again is that mean restriction works. So the more barriers that we can put between somebody and a method to end their life, the greater chance we have of saving their life. Okay, so what that means is making sure that those firearms are put up safe, making sure that medications are put up safe, those kinds of things. If someone's having suicidal thoughts, discussing kind of what is your plan to say, hey, how can we kind of make that less accessible for you? Oh, sorry, I got out of it. How many people have ever thought, oh, he or she won't die by suicide because they just had a baby, they just got their dream job, they just got married, they just this, they just that? True or false, you think? Good about the chat. So it's false, right? Because even though some of these things are protective barriers or protective factors, the thought, the intent to die can override any rational thinking that they're having. Okay. So if they're having that suicidal ideation or intent, or they express it in any way, we have to take it seriously, no matter what it is that we think, oh, they won't do it because they wouldn't do that to their kids, or they know how much their family would miss them, or things like that. Those aren't the rational thoughts that folks are having.
You got some burnt hair when the first few times. So. Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions before we go on into that? So the first part of it was just kind of some understanding on that suicide prevention piece of it, or the impact of suicide. Do you guys have any questions real quick before we move on? So S.A.V.E is an acronym. I worked as a suicide prevention coordinator at the VA here in town. And so this was one way that we kind of said, hey, how can we help folks remember all of these things that we're teaching them, right? And so S.A.V.E, right? S stands for the signs. So being able to be aware of the signs that we're looking for, being able to ask the most important question of all, be able to validate what they're going through, and then encourage treatment, expediting getting help. Okay, so that acronym will kind of lead you through what do I do if I think somebody's having a suicidal crisis. So the S was, see, it's so much easier in person because everybody yells out signs, right? So the S is signs. So when we think about warning signs, just because they're having some of these warning signs does not necessarily mean that they're having suicidal thoughts. It just means like, hey, I need to investigate this a little bit further and see what's going on. Because the sooner that we can catch these things, the better chance we have of helping them, of getting them connected to resources and that sort of stuff. So here are some signs. Social withdrawing. I almost said social distancing because of the pandemic. But social withdrawing, right? If you have somebody, let's say your friend, family, whomever, who all of a sudden is not answering phone calls, they're not coming to any events anymore or anything like that, it might be a time to say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't really been calling me back, and you haven't gone to, like our family reunions or our weekly lunch or whatever it is. Is everything okay? Everything might be okay. They might be really busy, or it might be, hey, you're right, I have been really stressed out lately and I've just really been struggling. Or sleep disturbances, whether they're sleeping too much or sleeping too little. And this can be a big one, right? Because imagine that, how happy are you guys if you don't sleep for like 5 days, or you have limited sleep for 5 days? Anybody like super happy, super excited? Not very many people, right? And if you haven't slept or you've had limited sleep for the last 5 days, how rational are you? Kind of impulsive, right? We get kind of irritable, that kind of stuff. And so if you add on suicidal thinking on top of that, it's not a good mix, right? So if folks aren't sleeping or sleeping too much, that can also be a warning sign to say, hey, what's going on? I've noticed that, you've slept all day, or that kind of stuff. If they've had increased reckless or risky behavior, if they've increased their substance use, so drinking or using more drugs and alcohol. And another thing that I like to point out is the pink cloud. Okay, how many people have ever watched commercials for medications, and it's like an antidepressant, and it says may increase suicidal thoughts in children or young adults or whatnot, right? And you're like, what's going on? Like, this is supposed to help that. Why is it making it worse? And so the thing to consider with this is that oftentimes when folks are depressed, they don't have energy, they don't have the motivation to do anything. So they're really low down here, right? And so if I put them on, it's not me because I don't prescribe medication, but if somebody were to put them on an antidepressant, it might not fix them to where they're normal, but it might give them just a little bit more energy and motivation to do something. And suddenly that's the push that they needed to follow through on their plans. So we also need to watch this when folks are starting to take that new medication and they're kind of adjusting to it. And they're like, no, everything is great. Everything's going to work out in the end. We also need to watch that to say, hey, when you say that, does it mean that you've been having these thoughts and you're going to act out on them? Or is it because you truly mean that things are getting better for you? And as we're talking about this, you guys, I want you to remember that we don't expect anybody to be an expert on suicide prevention. We're just hoping that folks know the minimum, right? Know the signs, know what to do so that they can get them connected to somebody who can help them, who is that expert in that. Other signs of suicidal ideation, that hopelessness, feeling like there's nothing that they can do. Like, this is just my life now. Like, my life will never get better. Feeling purposelessness. Okay. So, you know, let's say somebody who's retired, right? And their whole life for 50 some years, they've been working in this career. And now all of a sudden, that's not who they are anymore. That purposelessness can sometimes lead folks to be like, why was I born? Why am I here? What am I doing with my life? Okay, so that could be a sign that says, hey, do we need to ask them about these suicidal thoughts? Mood changes, if they're having extreme mood changes, they're having shame or guilt or feeling like they're a burden on people. You know, oftentimes kids say, you know, my parents would be better off if they didn't have to worry about me. Or, you know, my significant other's life would be so much better if she didn't have to worry about how much we argue because of my mental health or things like that. If they start feeling or saying things like that, that makes it seem like they're a burden, that might be something that we also need to say, hey, what's going on here? Okay. And so, like I said before, all of these things could be warning signs. But just because they have some of these doesn't necessarily mean that they're having suicidal thoughts. Okay, it just means it's something that we need to check out. When we get into this slide, this is when we're like, holy smokes, not only are these red flags, but these are red flashing flags that we need to get them help. Okay, so if they're writing or talking about suicide, a wish to die, or death, so everyone would be happier if I'm not here, that kind of stuff. If they're buying or storing things that can be used for suicide. Okay. So if you go over to your friend's house and you're like, why do you have 7 years worth of Tylenol here? What's going on? That could be a sign that we need to check that out further. Right. Or if they say, hey, you know what? I've been looking to see what the fastest way to die is. If they're starting to research things like that. If they're preparing for their own death. So making sure that their kids, their parents, their pets, everything would be cared for. Giving away their possessions. So imagine that you have a friend named Tom and he loves his dog Max. And then all of a sudden, one day Tom is like, you know what? I really want you to have Max because I think you're going to give him a good life. That might be a warning sign that says, whoa, what's going on? You love Max. You would never give him up. What's going on? Type of thing, okay? And so all of those are warning signs. And as much as those are red flashing signs, they're even bigger. They're even more red. They're even more flashing if they've ever attempted suicide before, if they have a family member or a close friend who has died by suicide, or they have plans to and access to an effective means. Okay, so, you know, if I live here in Kansas and I tell somebody that my plan is to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, and their next question is like, how are you going to get there? And I'm like, I haven't really thought of that. That's what I'm going to do. We're going to take that seriously, but we're not going to take, but the person that says, well, I bought my one-way ticket on Thursday. I leave at 6 a.m. I am going to Uber there so they don't have to worry about where my car is and I'm not taking anything. That's how I'm going to get there. that person is red and flashing even more than that other person. Does that make sense? So both of them are flashing, but one is flashing brighter. And one is saying we need to get them help right here, right now. Does the signs make sense so far? I'm gonna assume this means yes. So if S is signs, the A was asking the most important, oops, I'm going too far. The A is asking the question. So just being able to ask the most important question of all. What do you think the most important question of all is?
Do you want to kill yourself or harm yourself?
Right. So are you thinking of suicide? Are you having thoughts of taking your own life? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about ending your life? And oftentimes what we run into is that if you're not used to talking about this in everyday life, right? Like I can ask these questions, no big deal. I talk about suicide all day, every day, right? But if you're not used to it, some of those asking that question can kind of feel weird and awkward and like, do I have a right to ask them this and that kind of stuff? And what we say with that is, again, we want to be very clear on what we're talking about. When we're talking to somebody about having these thoughts, we want to know, are you having these thoughts of ending your life? And I really caution folks to be very direct about it. Because like, for example, I was working at the crisis center and I asked, hey, are you having thoughts of harming yourself? No, I'm having thoughts of killing myself. So folks can have a very different meaning between harming and killing. Or so it is just really, I just really encourage folks to be very direct about it. Hey, are you having these thoughts of suicide? Are you having thoughts of ending your life? Are you thinking about taking your own life? Those kinds of things. So that they can know exactly what it is that you're talking about and that you can know that, hey, this is what I am talking about. Will you always know what to do? Probably not, honestly. Sometimes I don't know what to do, right? But the idea is that if I don't know what to do, I at least know how to get you to the person that does know what to do. And so when you're asking this question, you do want to ask it if you've identified any of the warning signs, okay? You want to ask it in a way that's kind of natural and flows with the conversation. So I'm not going to be like, hey, 30 minutes later, be like, hey, do you remember earlier when you said this? What did you mean? Like, I'm just going to say, hey, I heard you say this. What did you mean by that? And we're not going to ask it in a way as that we're looking for no answer. Because if I say, Tom, you're not thinking of doing something stupid and killing yourself, are you? What are they going to say? No, I'd never do that, right? Because we're setting them up to say, I want to hear a no answer, okay? And we don't want to wait until they're halfway out the door, they're leaving, okay? Because if I'm sitting here with Tom and he's leaving and I'm like, hey, Tom, wait, are you having thoughts of suicide? He's going to be like, nah, see you tomorrow. Right? So we want to ask it as it comes up and kind of have it be a little bit more natural, right? Will it always feel natural? No. But the important thing is that you're saying, hey, I'm giving you a place to talk about it. Again, I may not know exactly how to help you, but I can definitely get you to somebody who can. And that's the whole point of this training, right? Is to say, how do I know when somebody's at risk? And then when they are at risk, how do I get them the help that they need? Because it might not always be me or you, right? It might be somebody else, and that's okay. When you're asking those questions, we want to remain calm. Talk very openly about it. Be willing to listen and allow them to express their feelings. When you're listening, or when you're doing this, you want to do a lot more listening and a lot less talking, right? And one of the things that we'll talk about here in a little bit, well, I'll wait. But just use body language that shows that you're listening. So pay attention to them, right? If Tom's talking to me about having these thoughts of suicide and I'm like, okay, what does that show him? How interested am I in that? Not very, right? And what are the chances that Tom's going to keep talking to me? Not very, right? Because I'm already asking somebody who feels like a burden to tell me these things. And then if I make them feel like more of a burden, that's not going to be very helpful either, right? And so the S is signs, the A is ask the most important question of all. The V was, does anybody remember what the V was by chance? Validation. Validate their experience. And so here's the thing. Oftentimes, when we think about folks that are having suicidal ideation, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I need to change their mind. I need them to see that their life is worth living, right? And while that's wonderful, that's great, sometimes it can have the opposite effect on folks, okay? So when you think about validation, Webster defines it as recognizing or affirming the validity or worth of a person, their feelings or opinions, to cause them to feel worthwhile or valued. So when I'm validating something, it doesn't mean that I agree with it, doesn't mean that I like it, doesn't mean that that's how I would feel if I was in that exact situation. It just means I can see it is what it is, right? I can see that you're feeling really sad right now. I can see that you feel so alone right now that you're thinking of ending your life. I can feel that you think that nobody cares about you. Okay. And so going along with that is that wording kind of matters. Okay. So I'm not sure if you've noticed, but throughout this whole thing, I've kind of said died by suicide versus committed suicide or attempted suicide or failed attempt or things like that, because those little words can make a big difference, right? And so when we're talking about folks, we're really using their words to describe what it is that they're going through. And we're going to kind of practice that here in a minute. So this one, here in a second, I will probably ask you guys to unmute if you can, because this one's a little bit more interactive. So imagine that you all are my best friends, right? I have a lot of best friends. And so I come to you. And I say, somebody together. Are there people together? So if you'll mute until so that I can talk, and then you can mute when you talk. Sorry. So if I come to you as my best friend and I say, my goldfish died, and I had him for 24 hours, and he was my best friend, and I don't know what I'm going to do now. Okay? I've practiced acting, by the way. So if I come to you and I say that, what's your natural response?
I'm sorry to hear that.
Sorry to hear that. Anybody like, it's a goldfish, like get over it. It's not that big of a deal. Get in 24 hours, right? Get a new one. So when we say those things to this person, what kind of happens to them?
What was your question? I'm sorry.
So if your best friend came to you about their goldfish dying and you said, okay, get a new one, it's been 24 hours, big deal, what do you think happens to them? Yeah, Janet says they feel like their feelings don't matter. They feel like you're not listening, right? They feel like, wow, why am I telling her anything? She doesn't care, right? And so how would be a better way to validate their feelings? To say, because again, doesn't mean that we agree with it, doesn't mean that we like it, doesn't mean that that's how we would feel. How could we validate somebody who is going, yeah, and I don't know who D. Johnson is, but they said that they're not going to keep sharing with you because you're not showing that understanding. True, right? So how would you show your understanding to somebody who is upset that they just lost their goldfish? How do you think that they are probably feeling right now? If they just said,
Give them feedback like, I hear
you feel sad.
Yeah.
So that they feel their voice is being heard.
Right. So they probably feel sad, hurt, right? And so one of the easiest ways to validate people is to say, I can hear that you feel sad. I can tell that you're hurt that your goldfish died. I can tell that you're feeling really upset about this. Right? And so that's one of the easiest way to validate them is to say, I can feel this. Or it seems like you're really upset. Right? And that gives them a chance to keep talking about it rather than shutting them down. Because if I'm like, dude, it was a goldfish, get over it, suddenly their feelings don't matter and they're not going to keep talking to me. And even though I think that a goldfish dying is no big deal, to that person, that could be the biggest thing that they've gone through, right? And so when we think about teenagers, kids like that, what is something that you can think of that a teenager goes through that we're like, ugh, not a big deal, not the end of the world? What are some examples?
Breaking up with a girlfriend, boyfriend.
Right, breakups, right? Teenagers are notorious for feeling super sad about breakups, right? And we as adults sometimes want to be like, if you're not Corey and Topanga, you're fine, you're going to meet somebody else, you're going to whatever, right? But when we do that unintentionally, what we're doing is kind of shutting down their feelings, right? And saying, hey, like, it doesn't really matter how you feel, it's not a big deal, right? And so learning how to kind of say, I can tell that you're really upset by this. I can tell that you are really hurt by this breakup. I can tell that you're really sad by this. And that gives them a chance to talk about it and process it. Because if you go straight into trying to fix it, that's going to kind of cause them to shut down again too. You know what I mean? And so I always use those silly validations to kind of say, even though it may seem silly to us sometimes, to that person, this could be the biggest deal in the entire world. So my goldfish dying could literally be the biggest thing to me right now. And you never know when that is the one thing that is going to cause that person's kind of cup to overfill on all their emotions. Okay, so a couple other validations that I enjoy doing. Oh my goodness, why is it not going? Okay, so if I say, whoa, so if I was like, my boss says I have to get to work on time every day, it's ridiculous. How many people's natural instinct is to say, you're an adult, get to work on time, right? I've had people be like, well, I'd buy them an alarm clock. Okay, but if we go straight into solutions, what happens? They shut down, right? So the one thing that I always encourage folks is when somebody's coming to you with a problem, always, always, always validate that problem first. Before you start in on solutions, before you do anything, because if you don't, anything you say after that is just them saying, obviously this person doesn't care, and they're gonna shut down. So how would you validate, my boss says I have to be to work on time every day? Every day. It's ridiculous. How would you validate me with that?
I hear you're having trouble getting around on time in the morning.
Okay, yeah. How else might, so I can hear that you're having troubles with that. How might this person be feeling? I can understand that it's hard for you to get to work on time. This person might be feeling frustrated. D. Johnson said, I understand putting on clothes every day is hard. Maybe they work from home. I don't know. But they might be feeling frustrated or annoyed, right? And so when I say, dang, it sounds like you're really frustrated that your boss wants you to be on time to work every day. Nowhere in that did I say that I like it, that I agree with it, or that that is how I would feel. All I'm saying is I can tell that you're frustrated that your boss wants you to be on time every day. And from there, that is where you are allowing them to kind of say, hey, your feelings are right. Regardless of what they are, your feelings are right. Okay, and now we can have an actual discussion about it because they feel like, hey, you actually are hearing what I'm saying. Okay. So when we do our role plays, we'll do some more validation and talking on that piece, okay? So I always do the silly ones because I feel like it kind of helps people to be like, oh, validation's not that hard or whatever, or validation's a little bit harder than I realized, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, well, when it comes to life and death situation, I'll be able to validate their experience. Well, you never know what a life or death situation is. And so we need to learn how to validate the little things, all the way from the little things all the way to the big things. Okay, so far we've done S, which is the signs. A is asking the question. V is validating. And E is expediting and encouraging getting help. So encouraging treatment and expediting getting help. So what should you do if you think someone is suicidal? So don't ever keep that person's suicidal behavior a secret. I know that oftentimes folks will say things like, you're just going to make things worse because now I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to this, or I'm going to do that. But at the end of the day, if we're seriously concerned about somebody's safety, it's their life that we're talking about. And so I need them to be safe at the end of the day. If you're seriously worried about somebody, don't leave him or her alone. And then, did I skip a thing? Okay, no, I didn't. And try to get that person to seek immediate help from his doctor or from the nearest emergency room, or for you to call 911. Be able to reassure them that there is help available, right? Might not be immediate, but there is help that we can get you. You can always call the crisis line. And the crisis line can always just talk with them, help them, give them local resources, things like that. Maybe they just need somebody to talk to and they'll be okay. So one of the things that I encourage folks with the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is that you can use that before you get to the point that you're having suicidal thoughts. The whole point of that is to prevent suicidal thoughts, right? And to prevent suicides. So if you need somebody to talk to help you not go that route, call them. Call them before you have those suicidal thoughts. So I always encourage folks to call them at any stage in their mental health crisis. You never want to negotiate with somebody who has a gun or another weapon. Make sure that you get yourself to safety and you call 911 because we also want to make sure that you are safe as well. If the person reports to you that they've taken pills, cut themselves, or done harm to themselves or herself in any way, call 911. Okay, because you never know how many pills they've taken, right? Or even if you think, hey, it was just Tylenol, well, you don't know what their liver is like. You don't know what else they took in conjunction with the Tylenol. So if they say that they've hurt themselves, taken pills, or done anything in any sort of way, call 911. Make sure that they're medically cleared, and from there they'll be able to get connected with some resources. Another thing with safety is a safety plan. So I share these more as an information for you. Usually if folks are in therapy, if they've just gotten back from the hospital, things like that, they will make a safety plan. So these are just more for an FYI thing for you to be able to know what a safety plan looks like. One of the things that as I did this work is that I really encourage folks to share their safety plans with significant people in their life. So roommates, friends, family, things like that. Because oftentimes we may not be able to see our own warning signs, but other folks that know us might be able to. And so the safety plan includes different warning signs that person might be experiencing that shows, hey, I am gearing up towards a mental health crisis or a suicidal ideation or things like that. It also helps them identify coping skills that are going to help distract them or her from thoughts of suicide. And when I say the safety plan, it's not just used for suicide prevention. It could be used for anxiety attacks, depression, substance use, that kind of thing. So you'll see the safety plan used for a lot of different things, not just suicidal ideation. And so they'll have the coping skills, the people that they can call, and then finally, any steps that they can take to make the environment safe. So it might be like, you know, so when I worked at the VA, I had a lot of folks who naturally, right, they wanted their guns. They all wanted their guns. Veterans love guns, right? It's just something that we had to deal with, right? And so it was really about how do we make this safe for you? Okay, does it look like you have bullets here and the gun is in pieces and there's a piece here and here? Or what does it look like? Because what research shows is that the more steps that we put between them and that lethal means, the better chance they have of stepping out of that irrational thought. Okay, and the better chance they have of getting help and saving their lives. Okay. And then another piece that we've added on there is one thing that makes your life worthwhile in living, because that's the point of life, right? Is that you have a life worth living. And my life worth living is going to be different than every single one of your guys is on here, right? It might be similar, but what makes my life worth living is not going to be the exact same as your guys's. So everybody kind of finding that piece. And sometimes it's just, I want to make a change in the world. My life is worth living for my pets, for my children, for my family, that kind of stuff. And another piece with this encouraging treatment is keep trying. So research has also found that engagement is one of the most protective factors. And so when I say protective factors, it kind of means something that could potentially save them from suicide. And so what they have found is that human beings are very social people. We want to belong to something bigger than ourselves. Okay? And so keep trying to engage this person. So one of the things that I use for this is when you think about Winnie the Pooh, right? How many people know who Eeyore is? Right? The little donkey? What do we know about Eeyore?
He's depressed.
He's sad, right? Like he's always like, oh, my life, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things about Winnie the Pooh and his friends is they never stop asking him to come do things with them, right? And so that's kind of what we have to do. When folks are in that depressive state, they can't always reach out for help. And it's great, right, for us to say, yeah, call me if you need me, that kind of stuff. But if we also know that somebody is struggling, for us to kind of take a little bit of that and to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to keep asking this person to hang out with me. Okay. Because if, let's say that my friend Tom, right? And I'm like, hey, Tom, you want to hang out? And he's like, no, not today. I'm just really tired. And I ask him again tomorrow. And I'm like, hey, Tom, do you want to hang out? And he's like, not today. And then like next week I say, hey, Tom, you want to hang out? He's like, no. What eventually happens? I stop asking Tom to hang out, right? Because he keeps turning me down. Well, the thing is, when folks are in that depressive state, the one thing that could be the most important thing for them, that engagement piece, they can't always seek out. And so sometimes if we are seeing that in our friends or families, just reaching out to say, hey, I've noticed this. Can I come hang out? Can we do something? And just keep trying to engage them. And the thing with this too is I always encourage folks to do self-care. Okay. Self-care is not selfish. It's none of that, right? Self-care is saying, how can I take care of myself so that I can give the best possible me to other people? Okay, so you've heard the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You got to take care of yourself first. And I take that a little bit further and I say, if I have water in a pitcher and it is brown and gunky and there's twigs in it and there's anything like that, there's trash and debris in it, how many of you guys want to drink of my water? Nobody, right? And so if I'm not taking care of me, the only kind of water that I'm giving people is that brown gunky water that nobody wants. So I need to make sure that I am saying, how can I clean out my water? When I was doing treatment, I really pushed that with my folks, and people would be like, right now my water is turning brown and I need to figure out how to filter it again. And that's okay, right? Sometimes our water turns brown and we are not giving us to people, to our children, to our coworkers, to our patients, or anything like that. And so it's just learning to say, how can I filter my water to make sure that I'm okay so that I can give the best me to these folks. So the National Crisis Line, dang, it's almost 7 o'clock. So the National Crisis Line is on here. Again, you can call it, even if you're not having suicidal thoughts. You can call it if you need somebody to talk to, or ComCare Crisis. It's at 635 North Main here in Wichita. You can also call their number. Oh, and one of the things that I like to tell folks with the National Crisis Line is that the National Crisis Line and the Veterans Crisis Line is now one. Several years ago, they used to be two separate numbers. So like the veterans and military crisis would go here, and civilians and everybody else would go here. And so what they found was that oftentimes folks that were on the Veterans Crisis Line were on hold sometimes for up to like 10 or 11 minutes. When folks are reaching out for help, they're the last people you want to put on hold. And so what they did was they merged them. And so now the Veterans Crisis Line and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline are one number. Veterans press 1, it goes to a special line, but let's say it's 4th of July and there's a lot of veterans calling in. It will roll over into the national hotline so that they will always have somebody to talk to. And let's say it's like a full moon and now everybody's in crisis. The national hotline will roll over into something local. So here in Wichita, it's ComCare Crisis. So if you call the national hotline, excuse me, and they're super full, super busy, you could actually end up talking to somebody at ComCare Crisis because they wanted to put as many steps as they could in so that nobody has to be put on hold. Because again, if you're calling and you're asking for help, that is not the time that we want to put you on hold. So they tried to do a lot of different steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. Another good resource here in Wichita that we have, which is phenomenal, is a Good Grief. It's the Survivors of Suicide Loss group. Jim Yoder is the facilitator. And I know it sounds really cliche and whatnot, but I went to this group and I lost my brother. And it's an amazing group. You become like a family, and you really get to connect with folks that have gone through a similar loss that you have. And so while all deaths are kind of hard to deal with, having a suicide death kind of adds another layer to it. And so you get to meet folks that are going through the same thing as you and have the same experience with all the different emotions that you're feeling. So that's a really good resource if anybody has ever lost anyone to suicide. They meet on Mondays. I know that they were meeting virtually, but I think they might have just started going back in person. So if you or anyone you know is in need of that, you would call Jim and you would say, hey, Esther told me about this, and he'll be like, oh, that Esther. And then he'll get you set up, make sure that you can go to all those. It's a really amazing group. There's been a lot of groups throughout Kansas that have attempted to do this, but Wichita is one of the only ones that actually not only sustains, but keeps growing. And not only that, but there's been lots of folks that are like, why is it that you guys can keep your group going, but we can't over here? And then there's been a lot of talk about folks Like there's a lot of research on folks who die by suicide or who have attempted suicide, but there's not a lot of research done on survivors. And so this is a really good resource. So we have 7 minutes. I didn't realize that I would talk as much as I did. I mean, I did because I do love to talk. And so what if we do one role play and kind of work that way? That way I have some time for some answers because I have till 7, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys. So like, let's just imagine this. Okay, I'm Roberta. I'm a 14-year-old girl. My parents are going through a divorce. I've attempted suicide before, and my boyfriend broke up with me today. And I come to you and I'm like, he just broke up with me. My parents are divorcing, and I know it's my fault. I can't do anything right, and I bet they would stay together if I was gone. So if we're going through S.A.V.E, okay, the S is signs. So what would be the signs here in Roberta?
It's her fault.
Okay, she's saying it's her fault. Things would be better if it would be better if I was gone. Her prior attempt, right? And then one of the things with suicide too is that one of the biggest triggers that research has found is that loss or sense of loss, right? And so that loss of that boyfriend, that breakup, can be a real trigger for her, right? So if that's the S, I personally like to validate before I ask if she's having those thoughts. So how would I validate Roberta, who just said, he just broke up with me. My parents are divorcing. I know it's my fault. I can't do anything right. And I know they would stay together if I was gone. How would I validate that? Is it harder than the goldfish? What do you think Roberta might be feeling? Okay, Janet said, I hear you, you're upset right now. So she might be upset. Sounds like she might be sad. I can hear you're having a hard time and you're upset. You can hear that you're feeling like things might be your fault, right? You can feel like you're going through a lot. You went going through a breakup, your parents are divorcing. And sometimes it just helps us to repeat their words back, right? Hey, so I can tell that you're going through a hard time. Just broke up. He just broke up with you. Your parents are divorcing. You feel like it's your fault, right? So I hear you saying that you feel things might be your fault. Okay, so those are all good ways to kind of validate her, right? We know what we can sense what she's going through. So how would I ask her? It might just be like, hey, sometimes when people feel like, or you said that you feel like they would stay together if you were gone, are you having these thoughts of killing yourself? Are you having thoughts of suicide? When you say you would be better off, if they would be better if you were gone, does that mean that you are planning on taking your life? Right? And so those are all different ways that we can ask using her own words, right? You say that you feel like they would stay together if you were gone. When people say that, it sometimes means that they're having these thoughts of suicide. Is that what's going on? So we're normalizing it, but we're still asking that question for her, right? We're still saying, hey, this is what I hear you say. Is this what this means? And then based on her answers, we're going to go into the encouraging treatment and expediting getting help, right? Because if she says, well, yeah, I do have those thoughts and that's why I took all those pills, then I need to call 911 right away. If she says, no, I'm not having those thoughts, I just feel like there's so much on my plate, then we might need to get her into therapy. right? But not necessarily the hospital right now. Or if she says, yeah, I've been having these thoughts and I don't know how to stop them. And I do have thoughts of, I guess I could take all these pills or whatnot. Like that would be a time for me to get her to the call 911 or see if she'll talk to the doctor or something like that. So depending on her answer, it's going to kind of depend on my response to her. Okay. So I have several other role plays, which I can send you the things like that. But just real quick on the role play. Do you guys feel like it was more difficult to validate the goldfish or to validate Roberta?
Roberta, whose feelings seem more real.
Feel more real, right? It's kind of harder, right? Sometimes it just depends on what folks feel more comfortable with, right? Because sometimes it's harder for folks to validate the goldfish because like they say, but these feelings are real. I can actually feel myself talk, like I could see myself having this conversation. Whereas the goldfish, I could never see myself having that conversation with somebody. And so again, with today, my whole goal was not to say that now you guys are all experts in suicide prevention and you can all screen for the hospital and whatnot. My goal was just to get you guys a sense of, here are the signs. When I see these signs, how do I ask this person? How do I validate their feelings? And how do I get them to who I need to get them to? Whether it's the therapist, whether it's 911, whether it's the hospital, whether it's the doctor, or, whomever it might be. So I know that I kind of feel like I rushed through a lot of that. I didn't realize 1 hour was so short. But just remember that S.A.V.E, the signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. A is asking the most important question of all. B is validating their experience, and E is encouraging treatment, expediting them getting help. Do you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns, comments? Y'all liked my acting skills? That's what it was.
You did a great presentation. Thank you.
So again, my name's Esther. My phone number's on here. My email address is on here. So if you guys have any questions or you're like, hey, I didn't really get to ask the question or whatnot, please let me know. I'm more than willing to answer any questions that I can, or at least put you in the right direction. But if you guys have any questions, now's your chance. So you guys are all experts now? I'm kidding. Yep, it's funnier when you laugh, but it's fine. I say that to my son and he's like, I'm like, I'm so much funnier when you laugh at my jokes. Any other questions or any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Dang, this might be the quietest presentation I've ever given. People are usually like, hey, what about this? What about that? And I'm like, let me research that for you. No? Okay. Well, Erica, do you have anything else that I need to do or for them to do?
No, if people are interested and would like if you would want to give me your presentation, the PowerPoint, I can email it out to the participants if they'd like it.
Okay. Yep. I'll email that to you tonight and then you can send it out to them. And then if you guys have any questions or anything like that, please let me know and you can give me a call. That's my work number or my work email. And then I'm happy to answer any calls or questions or any questions or concerns that you guys have. Otherwise, thank you guys for letting me share. I appreciate it.
Thanks for spending some time with us this evening.
Absolutely. Oh, I have some chats. Let me see. Yep. Oh, yes, of course. So if you guys have any other questions or anything, just let me know. And then that's all I have for today.
All right, take care.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.